Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Thank you so much for joining me today on this webinar, which, as you can see, is titled People Over Process, How Human-Centric Transformation Guarantees Engagement. But presumably you knew that already when you signed up. Um, so have you ever felt like you are being left behind with change? Or maybe you're a leader who's struggling to galvanize your team and organization through yet another transformation program. Now, I'm sure anyone that's on this call, anyone that is watching on catch up, we're all going through change. Change fatigue is the word on kind of everyone's mouth at the moment. There is not a single person who hasn't, in some shape or form, in the last few years, gone through change. And the reality is we are going through change upon change upon change all at the same time. It's overwhelming and it's exhausting. And trust me, you're not alone, because this is happening every single day in organizations around the world. But who am I? My name is Yasmine, and I am the Director of Transformation at Media Zoo. And I've always believed in the power of a people-first culture. So I am so honoured and feel so passionate about supporting clients with their transformation programs. And what this means is, and in the context of what we do at Media Zoo, is we design strategies that put people at the heart of change. Now, this might seem a little bit kind of strange to say. Surely change is about people. Of course it is. But what we tend to see is that organizations are building these change programs and they've got really great change management strategies, but they focus on the process only. And we're forgetting about the people that are going through that process, because ultimately change can't happen unless the people that are going through that change are engaged and they feel active and they feel like they want to champion the change. And if you've ever been through a change program yourself, or indeed any change in your own personal life, you will know that feeling of that you're kind of behind the change, you don't feel involved in the change, you don't feel empowered for that change. And that's really what this topic of the webinar is going to be about today. And I'm really excited to dive deep into this very topical conversation and hopefully leave you with a better understanding of why, when we are going through large scale change, whether it be digital, whether it be cultural, change is happening all around, we need to make sure we're putting people at the heart of that change, and we put them at the forefront of any creation of strategy before we start thinking of the process. Now, you may have heard this said before. I refer to this as human-centric transformation. So what is a human-centric approach to transformation? Because what I'm seeing, as I've said before, is workforces worldwide are suffering from change fatigue. And what happens is this makes us really resistant to change, because we think, I just can't go through another change. My brain is already spent. I can't engage with this. So we need to put that engagement back into the change. We're going to explore strategies today and best practices that are going to get the people at the centre of your change programs and increase engagement. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, I'm hoping you're going to be on side and agree that adopting a human-centric approach to transformation is really the only way to make sense of engagement and make your program successful in the long term. Because what we're looking for is successful change programs that future-proof your business. If you're watching on demand, you'll find my contact details at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to email me directly or connect with me on LinkedIn. And of course, if you're watching live, you can connect with me on LinkedIn afterwards, and I'm happy to carry on the conversation with you if there's anything left unanswered. So what are we going to be looking at today? We're going to be looking at these 4 key areas. So what is human-centric transformation? What are the benefits of adopting a human-centric approach to change? What are some of the pitfalls of neglecting humans in our programs? And finally, probably the bit that we're all anticipating, I'll leave you with some strategies that you can start to adopt that make your transformations and change programs a bit more human-centric. So why this topic? You may or may not be familiar with a very famous, now popular report from McKinsey that shows that up to 70% of change and transformation programs fail. And I'm really curious as to why this is, because change models seem to suggest that if you put in a really well-formed strategy and a really well-formed process, and you run certain interventions at particular times, then as a leader, you just need to kind of go along that process and everyone is kind of going to follow behind. But this anticipates that change runs in a straight line and you can plot it almost like a horizontal. And we all know this doesn't work. We've all come up against resistance to change, or perhaps us ourselves have felt resistance to change. So among the process and the focus on technology, we are often overlooking the human element. And I will say that in the majority of the work that I do with clients and leaders that I work with, they will think that they are really focusing on the people, but really what they're focusing on is getting to the end result and almost ignoring the fact that people are fallible and unpredictable. And, there's lots of different needs that we need to cater to when we take people on that journey with us. And what we often see is this leading to disengagement and resistance to change, which again, I'm certain that so many of you can relate to. And you may have also heard the statistic that we have up to 90% now of the UK working population disengaged or actively disengaging. So really, we only have 10% of people that are still feeling engaged in the world of work, which is a huge, huge crisis. And when we are going through any large-scale transformation, any type of change, this is the most crucial thing that we put at the front and centre of our minds. Are people engaged in this transformation? Are people engaged in this change? Are we putting the people first to make sure that this is successful? And this might seem really obvious, but you will be surprised how often this doesn't happen. So we're going to cover that today. So let's set the stage. We're living in an unprecedented time of technological advancement, and it's something that we might call the digital era. We're constantly evolving to adapt to tech through transformation initiatives. Digital transformation is a huge thing on everyone's agenda. And do I even need to mention the AI conversation? We are being bombarded at the moment, whether we're going to expos, whether we're on LinkedIn, whatever we're doing, we're being bombarded with this conversation about AI. And of course, all of these pieces of technology in their own way are going to support us and they're going to kind of further us in the workplace. But I feel that among the rush towards digitalization and these technological process, we're really overlooking something crucial. And we're overlooking the people who are actually going through that change and are going to be successful in making that change happen. So first, let's start with what we mean by a human-centric approach. It can kind of be summarized as a method of change management that prioritizes the needs and experiences and the well-being of the people involved. So not something that we would traditionally hear from a change model, a change management model. So well-being is not something I often hear when I'm listening to the change strategies of leaders or organizations. There's more likely to be focus on the process that is happening and how to get people from A to B, less thinking about the needs and the experiences. And the principle behind human-centric transformation recognizes that transformation, it's not about the process or the technology, but how the change impacts individuals. We know that change is complex and we know that change is emotional, even if on the face of it, it seems straightforward and logical. And we go through a range of different emotions during change, which means that our reactions to it are rarely predictable. And I kind of want us to remember that we as humans, there are so many things that go on neurologically. There's so many reactions to change because we like predictability. We want to keep ourselves safe. That's how our brain has evolved. From an evolutionary perspective, the less change we go through, the safer we are, and the less likely we are to get eaten or die. That's how our brain has evolved. So when changes are happening, our brain throws up all of these different things that tries to resist the change. It's not because people are lazy or they just inherently don't want to. It's because we're hardwired to resist that change. So while transformation may be really important to move your organization forward, and probably people understand that on a logical level, if people aren't on board and they're not championing the change and they don't understand the purpose of the change, then that change is probably not going to be a very successful one, or it's not going to last long term. So what is the case for human-centric transformation? Well, putting people at the center generates buy-in. It creates motivation and it reduces resistance to change and helps take people on that journey with you. So ultimately, they end up contributing to the change. And this is what is going to drive engagement and drive performance. So it's a win-win both for you as a leader and for your people as well. So how do we do it? I think the benefits of putting people at the heart of transformation programs are really obvious. And anytime I speak about this at conferences or talks or interact with people, they're always coming up with these kind of ways. But I very rarely see that translated into strategies when working with organizations or working with leaders. Anecdotally and kind of on one-to-one conversations, people understand this, but they don't bake it into their strategy. So what are some things you can do to actually action human-centric transformation and effectively start putting people at the center? So there are loads of things that we can do, but in the interest of simplicity, and if you're just starting out on this kind of approach, there are 5 key things that you can focus on that are really going to help you put people at the center. So first, understand the people that are going through that change. Understand your employees. We need to actually engage with people to understand their concerns, aspirations, and pain points. And this is something that is overlooked that needs to happen so early in that change journey. What are people's pain points around it? And I think there's almost this feeling of avoiding doing that because that is going to slow down the change in some way. But you have to get that data and you have to get that information up front to understand how we're going to bring people on that change, which brings me to my second point, which is design with empathy. So based on what you found out and based on what you are understanding the concerns of people to be and the pain points, we work with clients where they're doing yet another digital transformation, but the last digital transformation they went on was messy and a failure, and people are so resistant to it now. The minute that they hear that another digital transformation is coming, you're not starting from neutral, you're actually starting from a very negative space. So what we did was we worked with a focus group to understand what went wrong in the previous transformation, that previous change program, and cater to those pain points specifically in the messaging that we're giving out. So you want to really understand those pain points so you can start to design with empathy. So based on what you find out and the insights you gather about people going through the change, this is going to help you develop solutions and approaches that specifically tailor to these experiences. So you can start to design your comms around what their pain points are and around what those experiences are. And make sure, because these are going to be unique from company to company, that these are really tailored. Because if you start to roll out any generic old thing, people understand that and people recognize that. We really want it to feel tailored to that person and the people within your company. So focus on purpose. We want to show people the why and not the what. People can be very understanding of what is going to happen, but that's not how our brains engage. We will understand it from a logical level, but we need to buy into that purpose. Why is it happening? Build that story. Because that is the thing that is going to support people to connect it to their own world and their own lives. So focusing on the why, not the what, creating that story and focus on the purpose. Again, number 4, another one that might seem really obvious, but what I see done a lot of the time is there's this big, bold communication up front, maybe even just some emails are sent out saying, hey, just so you know, on this date, we're going to switch from this piece of technology to this piece of technology. You'll come in one day and it would have been switched overnight. And that's the only thing that you hear about it. And then it just happens and people are expected to just figure it out on their own. And there's probably a few of you smiling and nodding behind your cameras, because this is something that always gets a nod when I'm talking to people. The continuous communication is key, not just a one and done. Be clear, be transparent, and be continuous, because we need to be seen to do what we say we're going to do. And that helps keep people in the loop. It helps make sure that everyone's on the same page. And most importantly, people start to trust in what you're doing. They can see that there is a direction and that you're following through. So if there is any word that you take out of that sentence, it's the continuous bit. And we'll talk a little bit about, from a change model perspective, why that reinforcement piece is so crucial. And finally, seek ways to collaborate. So we want to involve people in the transformation process. We want to involve people in the change and get their outputs the inputs on how to make that change successful. Because so often we feel like change is being done to us. We don't get a say in it. And there's probably other ways that you could go about that change if only you had involved people in that process. And we're going to look at a quick case study on just that. So neglecting the human factor in transformation can lead to various pitfalls, especially when it comes to failed implementation of new technologies. And I'm going to talk through a real world example here for a case study. And that is the case study of Kodak, which some of you may know very well. It's a sort of tried and tested case study about hesitance to embrace digital transformation and failure to adopt a technology. But I want to give it a slightly different angle because there are other lessons that we can learn from this case study. So for those of you that don't know, Kodak was founded in 1888 by George Eastman and revolutionized photography by making it accessible to the public. So it's the first time this had happened. Think about, the 1800s. This was incredible, right? And throughout the 20th century, Kodak maintained its dominance in the market because it had innovative products and it had a strong brand. Flash forward to 1975. And one of its engineers, Steve Sasson, invented the first digital camera. So you imagine in 1975, there was already that technology for a digital camera. And this started to signal the company's awareness of emerging digital technology. So they kind of were already doing that move into the new technological advancement. But, and this is surprising, despite this innovation and despite it coming from their own internal engineer, Kodak's management perceived digital photography as a threat to the film business. So it dismissed it and it didn't aggressively pursue it or market the technology. So even though that innovation had come from within, they sort of said, well, this is actually a threat to our business and our brand. So that's not what we do. Because their primary revenue came from film sales. So they didn't want to start embracing that digital photography because they thought it would undermine the core of its business. But you can probably guess what happened. This lack of strategic shift meant that competitors like Fujifilm started to invest in digital technology. So they started to get ahead of the curve and they diversified their offerings, while Kodak remained focused on film. Now, this story ends the way that so many kind of other businesses have gone when they ignore digital transformation. So as digital cameras gained popularity in the late 1990s and early 2000s, if you were out partying in the mid 2000s, I bet you there is some folder on Facebook with like 200 digital camera snaps, because I remember when I was going out and there were just digital cameras everywhere. Kodak's market share rapidly declined because their failure to adapt led to significant financial losses for them. And by the early 2000s, they struggled to stay profitable because they just didn't adapt to that digital change. They did eventually get on board, but of course it was too late by this point, and the competitors had already established a strong position. So despite investing heavily in digital technology and printers at that point, they failed to replicate their dominance in the film market. And in 2012, they filed for bankruptcy because they just couldn't keep up with their competitors, even though they were really one of the first companies that had that innovation internally. So what could Kodak have done differently to change this sequence of events? Now, I feel that by taking a human-centered approach to their transformation, they could have brought their employees on board with the digital change and potentially change this outcome altogether. So if we think back to some of our key points that we covered in our previous slides, those top 5 things, What can we pull out from there that human-centric transformation approaches that could have helped Kodak here? So they could have understood their employee needs. So if they'd adopted a human-centric approach, they may have involved their employees more deeply in the transition to digital. So when their lead engineer started coming up with that innovation, rather than run away from it, they could have pulled more people into it and then got their ideas and started to build a lot quicker, leveraging insights and leveraging their expertise. They could have designed with empathy. So by considering how a digital transformation would affect its employees and understood what was going on for them, they could have developed strategies that mitigated fears and embraced that innovation. So rather than what happened, which was everyone kind of running scared, they could have leaned into it by understanding those pain points and designing around it and really embraced that innovation. And they could have focused on collaboration. So again, engaging the employees in the transformation could have provided a culture of innovation, adaptability, and reduced that resistance to change. So instead of doing what actually happened, which was leaning away because they were worried it was going to undermine their business, that they could have leaned into it and increased collaboration with everyone. And we can take this failure to put humans at the heart of that transformation as a bit of a cautionary tale of putting process before people and only thinking about specific business goals in that way. Because by prioritizing empathy and communication and collaboration, Kodak may have successfully navigated the digital revolution and been that front runner. And who knows where they would have been today. So I want to talk briefly about a change model, which you can see on screen. So what do we do and what do MediaZoo do? So when we work with clients, we help to build transformation strategies based on insight, behavioral science, and change models. And one of these is ADKAR, which you can see on screen. It's a very tried and tested method of change. And the ADKAR model really focuses on humans at the heart of the process. It's a really simple principle, and its principle is that organizational change can only happen when individuals change. And we can only get individuals to change when we put them at the center of our strategies. So ADKAR is an acronym for the 5 outcomes an individual needs to achieve for change to be successful: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And you will have recognized a lot of these elements reflected in the previous slides that we've already gone through. So what is people's awareness of that need for change? What is their desire to participate and support that change? What is their knowledge of how to change? Do they know how to do it? Are they capable? Do they have the ability to implement the desired skills and behaviors? And finally, I would have mentioned that word reinforcement a little bit earlier on. Is there that reinforcement to sustain the change? The reinforcement element is the one I feel most passionately about, because I think we do awareness really well, and I think we don't do reinforcement at all. We kind of have that thing, we have the change, and then people are left to their own devices. But without that reinforcement, we're going to go straight back to our old behaviors. And why we default to old behaviors is a whole other webinar in itself. But we are hardwired to go back to old behaviors. So if we're not having that reinforcement, your change may have initially had compliance, but it won't have had true commitment. So what are some of the ways that we can implement them? So we have the change model, we have the change theory. There are loads of different interventions and methods you can apply based on this model. And at MediaZoo, we focus on our creative, our learning, strategic communications, and digital experiences to create powerful campaigns that guarantee engagement and drive performance and change. So I've just put a few examples of how we might translate the ADKAR model into a campaign that we create around transformation programs. So your awareness may be an internal communication strategy. The desire may be a creative film campaign that really changes hearts and minds and gets people motivated and wanting to go through that change. Knowledge may be an immersive experience that really engages the brain and helps them retain that knowledge. Ability, we may be putting in learning opportunities or training opportunities for development and growth. And finally, with reinforcement, that also could be a comms campaign, but it also may be leadership and management support, where we're really helping line managers or leaders to reinforce the messages of that change throughout. But ultimately, the best strategies for transformation will always follow the elements of ADKAR when you boil it down. And this gives us a great roadmap for thinking about putting people first. And I just want to leave you with this thought around overcoming change. So, change can be successfully navigated when we apply a people first strategy, some of which I'm going to leave you with here. So, education and awareness is going to provide employees with a clear understanding of the reasons behind the change and the benefits that it's going to bring, which is going to significantly reduce resistance for you. Showcasing success stories from within the organisation or from industry peers can serve as powerful motivators, pulling out tangible benefits and giving proof that change is both achievable and advantageous. Providing training, so offering training is a great hands-on way to equip people with the skills and the knowledge that they need to thrive in a new environment. A continuous feedback loop really helps gather that feedback from employees at all levels, meaning you can gain valuable insights into experiences, concerns, and suggestions. And it's what we do with that feedback that's really important and crucial, because this needs to be reviewed regularly. Remember, we want to keep people part of that change. We don't just want to consult them up front and then ignore them. Review that feedback regularly and use it to adapt your strategies. So maybe you do put in place something, you get some feedback on it, it's not quite working. People are more receptive to that change again if they feel they've been seen, they've been heard, and they've been understood. So when we start to adapt their feedback, that means that we can help make iterative improvements and keep our transformation on track. And finally, as I've said, involving employees in the feedback means they are being valued and they can see it being acted upon. So this is not only going to enhance the effectiveness of your transformation program and your change, but it also builds trust, collaboration, and most crucially, guarantees engagement for the success of that change. So thank you so much for tuning in today. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing these insights with you, and it's gone so quickly, which often happens when I get lost in the passion of what I'm doing. So please feel free to share your thoughts, insights, or any questions you might have in the Q&A section. One question I always get asked is, how difficult is it to get people to change? And I love this question because my answer is, well, how long is a piece of string? The research about changes, though, is actually really interesting. What research tells us is that it's really difficult to change people's beliefs or attitudes, because that's really deep-rooted ideology. Like, we can change it eventually over time, but it takes loads and loads of work. But what they've discovered is that changing behaviours is actually more achievable. And what I say here is the number one reason that people do anything, and social science tells us this, the number one reason that people do anything is because we think that other people are doing it, which I find like mind-blowing. But if you think about any marketing or advertising, it's all really geared to us feeling like that is kind of the norm and that's what other people are doing, and that's why it works so well. So getting people to change behaviors is actually the easiest route to change, because they just kind of need to see that other people are doing that behavior and people will start to mimic it as well. So have a think about, rather than changing people's deep set beliefs, can we actually just change the habit of their behavior? And you'll be surprised how other people start to mimic other people when this starts. So I hope that helps as a bit of a thought starter. So let's have a look at what's in the chat. Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you, Anastasia. How much time does a successful transformation require? Obviously, this is so dependent on the change that you are trying to achieve. I work with clients where their change programs are kind of 2 to 3 years. That's a really kind of deep, entrenched, changing kind of the whole model of the organization, the transformation. There are obviously kind of smaller transformations that might take a few months. But I think the most crucial part to take away from this is that reinforcement piece. So I kind of liken it to losing weight, which I hate to bring up because we're like weeks away from Christmas and all we want to be doing is eating all the mince pies, right? And that's fine. You don't just lose weight and then you're done and then you go back to kind of old behaviors. It takes a lifetime to maintain those new behaviors so that weight doesn't start to creep on. And it's the same with transformation. It's all change, right? So transformation is a continuous thing. When the main bulk of what you're trying to change is in place, you still need to have that reinforcement continually to make sure that those behaviors stick. So I wish I could give you a specific amount of days or months, but of course it depends on what you're trying to change, how wildly different it is from what you already have. Is it a sidestep, just a few notches, or is it a complete 180? And also the understanding that change is constant and transformation is never really done. Probably a less helpful answer than you wanted, but thank you so much for asking it, Alice. Alison asks, I love your earlier point about the feedback loop. This requires confidence from leaders to truly engage with feedback from those subject to change, particularly negative feedback, but it's so important. Yes, Alison, 100%. So I actually did a talk at a conference last week and asked the audience, what are the things that went wrong in the changes that you took part in? And, people kind of talked for a few minutes and then kind of fed back to the group. And one of the things that someone said that I really loved was leaders not having the courage. And I just thought that's so critical, because what we see as well is leaders thinking that it's just going to be easier if I get my head down and just kind of, put all these processes in place and just kind of action them. But until we have that feedback from the people, and unless they feel like they're being listened to, that's really what's going to shift the dial for you most. It's going to make them feel engaged, and engagement is the secret sauce to successful change. So yeah, great point. Absolutely 100 agree. John, great presentation. Thank you. How do you navigate change failure with leaders? Yeah, really great question. I think what we ultimately need to do is speak to the kind of employees first. So what I've said, what I mentioned previously in this presentation, a client that I'm working with at the moment, the first thing we had to do when we were working with them on their digital transformation is unpick why the previous digital transformation failed. We had to go back to the people, we had to understand their pain points, and we had to kind of unpick that. Because there's no point in trying to lay another transformation or change program over the top of a very recently failed change program, because people aren't going to buy it. People definitely aren't going to engage with it. And in fact, what you're going to get is more resistance. So the first thing I would do is almost a sort of mini step before that actual change program. It's trying to engage people and undo a little bit of the, I'm going to call it damage, bit dramatic, but undo a little bit of that first and engage people in the, we know this one wasn't successful. Here's the reasoning. How did you feel about it? What are the pain points? Build that trust back up again. And only then can we go into the new transformation. Because if you are building a new transformation over a failed transformation, it's like building a house on the foundations of quicksand. It's going to dissolve very, very quickly because you are going to have so much resistance. But thank you so much if you put a question forward. It was so lovely to interact with you. So you can see on screen some contact details, and you can see a QR code. So I am in the modern technology times. So if you scan it, you can bring up my LinkedIn. Please connect with me. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. If I can support you in any way, or you'd like to just chat to me about what's happening in your organization, we can bounce some ideas around. You can also email me directly at yasminealani@mediazone.tv. And if you are watching on demand, please do email me with any questions that weren't answered in this session. So until next time, take care, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.